Hello and welcome to British History X. In this particular episode, I want to talk about St. Patrick. You might be saying to yourself, okay, well, isn't St. Patrick a Irish person, a patron saint of Ireland, I hear you say? Why do you want to talk about St. Patrick? Well, the truth of the matter is, as most people know, certainly from a British perspective, St. Patrick was a Briton. And that was an extremely important thing. So he wasn't actually born in Ireland, he was born in Britain, and he was taken to Ireland at a young age, where he then was kept as a slave. Then, after a few years, he escaped or somehow brought out his freedom, where he returned to Britain. And in that particular time, he decided that he needed to go back and convert the Irish to Christianity. And that's pretty much the story that most people know of St. Patrick. What I want to concentrate on is on the recent documentary done by Rich Planet, Baram Blackett, and talking about the book by Victor Orton, where we look at the origins of St. Patrick. Because certainly from the British perspective in South Wales, for example, there's some discussions around exactly where was St. Patrick born. And I just want to highlight what was brought up in that particular program because it's a very interesting topic, I think, and really, worth discussing here. And we'll look at it from the map perspective. Okay, so what do we know? Okay, so let's look at the geographic area of Britain and then Ireland. So let's imagine we're going back to the 5th century AD. Here we've got Ireland, and that would have been broken down into many kingdoms. Then what you would have had, obviously, here is Britain, and you would have had the many different kingdoms of Britain. Now, by this point, the influence of the Romans had waned, but there would have been limited still contact with Rome from the religious perspective. The Eastern Roman Empire was still going strong at this point, and that was still really, in effect, expanding, but the Western Roman Empire was in decline. I often talk about the concept of Britain's being in the Roman era. I don't like to use the term Roman Britain, and I don't like to use the term just Roman. I do obviously understand and respect the fact that Rome had an influence on the Britons, and I certainly will go into that in more detail in other videos. And this is important to this video because we're talking about the Latin language and the concepts of the Latin language, and that is important. So, of course, as you've most probably seen in my other videos where I talk about Caerwent, I talk about, for example, the Silures tribe and how they would have been self-administrative. And in that sense, they would have been speaking Latin purely for administrative purposes when they had to do business effectively with the wider Roman Empire. But they would have spoken in the Brythonic tongue for localized business, for localized affairs, in day-to-day, every day-to-day discussions. It would have been in the Brythonic language. Now, what I want to discuss here is why am I talking about Latin and Brythonic language in relation to St. Patrick? Well, this is all about Britain's hidden history. And this was discussed numerous times by Ross himself, who then put the video on his channel that Baram Blackett and Rich D. Hall had done. And what we're discussing here is really how St. Patrick, this worldwide figure that's celebrated on March the 17th, and I think in America they pretty much got parties in every town. Obviously, Ireland is their own patron saint. But from a worldwide perspective, I know, if you go to any Irish bar on March the 17th, it's insane. It doesn't matter which part of the world you're in. And even outside of Irish bars, some people just celebrate St. Patrick in general. And it's used for, that's March the 17th is an excuse for a grand old getting drunk, So, no, not to say there's nothing wrong with that, but what I'm trying to say is the contents of the history. So let's go back to who St. Patrick was. Well, St. Patrick wasn't actually Irish. As we know, St. Patrick was a Briton, and he came from this region of Britain. Now, we talk about the tribes. At the time, we talk about the Silures tribe. We talk about the kingdoms. We've got Gwent. And what would have happened at the time, as you look at my previous discussions that I've had, talk about how the Silures tribe was self-administration. We would have had the Britons being self-administrative and with limited Roman influence, except for the wider empire. All right. Now, at the time of St. Patrick, which was around the mid 5th century AD, roughly dated, by that time, the Britons were obviously Christianized to an extent, and Latin was spoken as the language within the church. Okay. And it would have still been an administrative language from a church religious perspective. But if we go back and look at the Brythonic tongues, that would have, of course, been spoken day to day. Now, what am I referring to Patrick? Well, what it was mentioned in that particular, and by Patrick's own word, really, in terms of the Confessios, that he studied from a academic and religious perspective at Llandwyd Major. What I mean by that is if we look on the map, that's actually quite close to the coast, okay? And it was reported that while he was studying there, the Irish pirates would have come in from the coast. So we got the Bristol Channel here. So if we look at where Ireland is, you've got Southern Ireland there. And then you would have had the Irish pirates coming down this way into the Bristol Channel. And if you look at this coast here, you've got some perfect coast where they would have landed. Now, some of this coast is actually quite, cliff laden. How did it look 1,500 years ago? Maybe slightly different, but not too much different. You're talking about Jurassic style coast here. And what you would have had was that they would have landed and that they would have taken what they needed to take from this particular area, right, which was a religious site at the time. And also, some say an actual academic site, where they would study. And again, this was a thing that was integrated back into the church, or the Church of Rome at the time, where Latin was spoken. Now, certainly from an academic perspective, but not from the day-to-day perspective, that's important. So then if we go back and have a look at where Patrick was born, and this is what the program talks about, is what they're saying is that Patrick, according to the Confessio, was born in a town, I believe, called Banavem. Okay. And I believe it's called Banavem Tabernacy or something like this. And then what they're saying is modern academics actually put that to a town which is up here called Banwen. And that, if I just look for that. There we go, Banwen. So if we look at that town there, that is good 27 miles, 30 miles from Llandwyd Major, which is in that area. It's also quite inland. And if you look at that, you've got some very, very hilly terrain. So if I go into a Google Earth perspective, you're looking at some very, very hilly terrain there in order to get to that location. All right. So they're saying that that is where Patrick was born and obviously studied in this area. Okay. Down this area. Now, what the program is saying is that wouldn't have been the case, because this area up here isn't really in good fertile land. It's what we may class as the traditional valleys. And what they're saying is that potentially St. Patrick was actually born, and if I scroll down, in a town here called Cowbridge, which is very close to Llandwyd Major. Now, you might be saying, well, okay, what's the justification for that? Well, we're talking 1,500 years ago. And the truth of the matter is, it kind of makes sense. This is fertile land. It's flat land, okay? It would have been good for, for settling down, for raising livestock, for establishing churches, for establishing, towns, cities, and so on, right? Compared to up this area. And if you were an Irish raider, then it would make sense that you would actually target this area down here rather than try and target further up. And I've always argued as well in my last video that the Roman influence would have been waning as we'd gone further west, all right? So even the Christianization of Britons would have been waning as you go further west. So it makes sense that the more east you go, it would have been the more favoured location for Britons who were either Christianized, spoke Latin from an academic perspective, all right? It would have been better that you were in a western location. So they're saying that Patrick was potentially born in Cowbridge. Now, the justification for that is that Cowbridge in Welsh is Ebonban, okay? And there's a town near they call Tyre Onen, which is 3 ashes. And when we do the translation back into Latin of Cowbridge, it comes as Bonven Pontum, all right? Now, when you put that together and change it slightly, it sounds like Bonavontum, right? Which sounds very similar to Banavem, right? And for me, over time, you could say, okay, well, that's really what they're trying to say in the video. It's an interesting, I think, line of thinking, and certainly I think it's very, very plausible. It just makes sense from a geographic location as to why Cowbridge would have been St. Patrick's birthplace over, let's say, this here. Now, if people know anything about Banwen, then please put that in the link below in the comments. Raise the topic around what you think of Banwen. If you know anything historical about Banwen apart from the so-called birthplace of St. Patrick by modern academics. But looking at the Victor Orton stuff, it really does make sense that Cowbridge, close to Llantwit Major, the influence of the Christianization from the influence of Rome or the Church of Rome makes sense. It makes more sense. Okay, and then you're closer also to Caer Went and to Caerleon, okay, Yscaslurum and so on. So it really does make more sense that Cowbridge would have been the birthplace of St. Patrick. So I'm going to put the link of the documentary below. When you get time, watch it. Obviously, Ross had put it on his channel, so it's in Britain's Hidden History. Obviously, Rich Planet has now been deleted, which is a real shame. But yeah, if you get a chance, watch the entire documentary. Baram's on form, and it's really, really good. So enjoy and all the best, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you very much.